Welcome back to Neon Liberalism. I'm Samantha Hancocksley. I remember where I was when those first results started coming back in last November. I remember that sick feeling in my gut when I started to realize that Trump was going to win. I remember the terror, the uncertainty that I felt after his inauguration when it seemed like he was doing anything and everything and ripping our government apart. And I think it's kind of good to, at this moment when maybe things also feel a little bit up in the air after this latest attack on Venezuela, take a step back to get away from following each exact outrage as it happens and take a bigger look, a longer term look at Trump's attempts at authoritarian consolidation in America and the state of the struggle against him. And thankfully, I've got Adam Gurri, editor-in-chief here at Liberal Currents, to talk about it with. Adam, you recently wrote a pretty optimistic article. We are going to win. Yeah, so I mean, are we going to win? What's going on?
I feel like my optimism is always very measured. I also way back in June, Will Stansel posted this statement that really stuck with me when Abrego Garcia was brought home from CICOT, from the prison in El Salvador. He said, Abrego Garcia coming home feels like the point where we can say Trump's revolution failed. He screwed up a lot of stuff, and things could still get pretty hellish, but they're not going to sweep away the American government and replace it with a dictatorship, at least without a lot of fights. And I have to say, just in general, I'm fairly anti-prediction, just because it's a real mugs game. Like, you could say, for example, that Trump is incompetent and the people he has are incompetent. There's a lot of sort of on paper things you could say, but then some contingent events could come along that no one thought of that give them an edge, right? That's just how things are. No one thought he was going to win in the first place in 2016, right? I'm sort of anti-hard predictions. But I actually have come around to the point of view that Will had the basic right of it, which is the way things are going, we're going to get them out of power. They're not going to do away with free and fair elections. In as much as they engage in suppression and other things that they've done before, even to a greater degree, it's not going to be enough. The people are pissed off. Their position is too weak, and they're not going to be able to stop themselves from losing in 2026. They're not going to be able to stop themselves from from losing in 2028, and they're not even going to be able to attempt this like fictitious third term run that they keep floating whenever they're feeling like that they're flagging in the polls. Again, it's a strong prediction, but it's not that strong. Like, I'm not going to say that things are going to be okay. I don't think the next 3 years are going to be a cakewalk. We have to do a lot in order to survive the next 3 years and minimize the harm that the Trump administration could do. And the bottom line is that even incredibly unpopular, even if he loses the active support of congressional Republicans, either through intentional withdrawal of that support or because they revert to their dysfunctional norm, even if the Supreme Court, for example, comes down strongly in favor of birthright citizenship and things like that and stops mucking around with the lower courts, the federal executive branch can do a lot of harm, with the people that are in power, in charge of it. And on top of that, the president and his people can do a lot of damage to the federal executive branch and the states and universities and various things that it all ties into. So really, no matter what, we're in for 3 years of pain. Like that's the non-optimistic underlying premise of the whole thing. But that doesn't mean they're going to get a dictatorship out of it. That doesn't mean they're going to win the ultimate victory. there's more to our victory than just getting them out of power. But I think at this point things look very good for that specific short-term victory.
Okay, so there's definitely some optimism, some pessimism in there. Why do you think that they are not going to be able to, pursue or succeed at authoritarian consolidation, right? Because they do keep on floating this idea of a third term,
Right.
right? They've tried shenanigans in the past, right? We're coming right up on the anniversary of January 6th. So why are you skeptical of that?
Yeah. So I think so. Why is it that Trump was even allowed to run in the first place, right? In 2024, when in theory that should be unconstitutional, given that he led an insurrection against the government, and some states tried to muck around with that. I think there is enough flexibility in something like what exactly constitutes, he wasn't exactly a general in a secession against the government, right? And while anyone with eyes, I think, doesn't exactly find January 6th to be ambiguous, in the public mind, it became ambiguous enough that they had some wiggle room. But third terms is not something that any normal American believes that there's some ambiguity about. And I think whereas a lot of states hesitated to really come down on the insurrection, aspect of the Constitution, because it's been so rarely used and it was so specifically used for the Civil War, that it's very different with a third term. What would happen if Trump tried to run in a third term is 100% of blue states immediately would disqualify him as a candidate. Many purple states that are under Democratic control would do the same, and that that would essentially doom him in a general election. So there are mechanisms in place that would stop him, and that sort of speaks to your more general point of why is it that I don't think they're going to win. Well, people always hold up Orban and Hungary as, oh, we're going to become like Hungary, but Hungary, on top of being an extremely tiny country, compared to our over 300 million person, continent spanning multi-ethnic polyglot, nation. It also is a unicameral parliamentary system. And moreover, on top of being a much more simple system, so it's a unicameral parliamentary system, and it's not federalist. It's a unitary system. The central government controls the whole country. There aren't local units that have independent authority of the federal government. And, most of all, Orban won initially with a huge supermajority that was able to pass amendments to their constitution. By contrast, we are a huge, complex country compared to Hungary. Our federal government alone is a huge and Byzantine apparatus that is difficult to wield in the best of circumstances. We have independent agencies on top of ones that report to the president. We have, the Senate has to give its consent for him to hire the top people. And bills have to go through two chambers differently constituted from either the president, from one another and from the president. It's complex. It's a very unwieldy thing. And none of the people, even though Donald Trump has done an incredible job personalizing control of the Republican Party, given that, no one in Congress owes their position of power to Donald Trump the way that Orban's party people are his party. It's just not the same. They have their own local bases of power. Trump's power over them is tied entirely to how Republican primary voters punish people that go against Trump. And in as much as that's not the case, they can go against him.
So I think this is interesting because this is the kind of line people were selling right at the start of the administration.
Indeed.
Right? Oh, Donnie, we brought him back, but there are all these institutional safeguards, right? We have this glorious rule of law and we have all these institutions, and that's going to stop him. And I think, again, to take a step backwards or back in time here, Trump and the team around him kind of recognized this, right? They
Yeah,
felt that after
definitely.
the first Trump term that they had been very hemmed in by the deep state, which I guess is their name for the rule of law or whatever. And they came in with with an understanding, right? Oh, we live in a complex system. It's too complex,
Yeah,
right? There are lots of institutional rules. There are too many rules. We are going to sweep the rules away. We are going to push on the rules. We're going to ignore the rules. Um, we're gonna, they had Project 2025.
yeah,
Then, of course, kind of coming out of nowhere for a lot of people, they had Doge, right? They had Musk, effectively like running the federal payment system for several months, right? And
yeah,
they genuinely did destroy federal agencies that were created by Congress. Right? They just were like, yeah, USAID, we're just killing that, right?
yeah.
Department of Education, we're just killing that. And they seem to have stayed dead, right? Those haven't resurrected themselves, as far as I know. Um, right. And so I think looking back, people would have found the line that you're giving right now, like, well, none of that seemed to work,
Right.
right? So what changed, right? Like, what's going on here?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's a fair point. Everything I said was true a year ago. The federal government is complex, as I said. We have a federalist system as well, where the states are pretty strong, and then just de facto, not even by law necessarily, our localities are also very strong and hard enough for our states to control. Never mind the federal government. That's all true. However, like you said, we also knew that coming into this year, the Trump people had learned from their first time, and they had a plan for how to overpower that, essentially. And there's simply no, I just don't think you can, in the abstract, say in advance they'll definitely fail at that, right? Like before you see what they do. But we have seen what they do, and I do think it would have been possible for them to have a higher chance of succeeding if they had gone about things differently. But essentially, what they did is act as though they had already succeeded from the start. They just thought that they could just rule by decree and send in the shock troops to suppress dissent wherever it arose, or provoke their own, crystal knock, or whatever it is, and then consolidate power. But they tried to do all of that at the same time on day one. And all they succeeded in doing was immediately alienating the thin base of support, because he had a very narrow victory, the thin base of support that they had. So, there definitely was at first a very alarming tendency among institutions and elites to act as though he had a Orban level, popularity behind him, and sort of knuckle down. Even to this day, today I was talking to someone who's in the film industry, and he had someone that wanted to work on a film about political influencers, and this would not get greenlit because none of the big networks right now are greenlighting any political content. That's still true. Like we still are in the midst of a crisis. Donald Trump still has gotten quite far in heavy-handed tactics towards the media and other institutions, but there's not much more he can try than what he has already done. He's sort of shot his wad all in the first year, and we've seen how it's gone. And how it's gone is bad. It's not great, but it's not ending democracy. It's gonna completely screw up our system in a way that's going to need a ton of work to fix. But it's not. They're getting creamed in what elections we are holding now. I can't imagine that people are going to be happier in November of this year as the chaos that they've inflicted on the economy, for example, has more time to play out.
Yeah, so this is something where I'm actually really interested by the places where the laws and the institutions have held him up and
Yeah.
have either stopped him or
Yes.
generated a lot of friction versus the places where they kind of haven't.
Yeah.
Um, right, and I wrote an essay for foreign policy right at the start of the Trump term, um, talking about this concept of guerrilla channel governance, that basically Trump is old, Trump is tired, Like he's visibly tired. I'm sorry, like he almost certainly had a stroke, right? That kind of like asymmetric facial droop is like mostly you get that from having a stroke. Um, this is before he had a stroke, but like I was kind of convinced that he didn't really have like the energy and the attention to detail to really successfully personalize a system, but that he would try it. And that what we would see was that areas where there was already a constituency in the government for his policies, they would be the easiest to implement. And so the big one right there, right, which was correct, I was totally correct about this, was immigration, right? Where there's already an enormous amount of federal discretion. And very importantly, ICE and CBP always wanted to be doing this shit, right? They felt like leashed and muzzled by Biden, but on an institutional level, they always wanted to be driving around in vans, grabbing people off the street. Um, and so I think that's the reason that that really has been like the biggest thrust of his domestic policy. And a lot of other stuff has been, he's here, he's there, right? For a little while, we saw that there was this attack on colleges and universities. That's still kind of simmering, but it doesn't feel like it's gotten the kind of like sustained institutional attention the way that deportations have gotten sustained institutional attention. Um, right. So I think, I was also very struck. The Supreme Court has kind of stepped in some of these cases where they say, okay, well, canceling foreign aid, like that's totally fine, or we're going to let that happen. We're going to let that grind its way through the courts or whatever.
Yeah.
But the institutions have absolutely rallied around the Federal Reserve, for example.
Yes,
right?
including the Supreme Court
is like, we'll just make up a bunch of bullshit and is like, don't touch the Fed. Right.
we are for the unitary executive. Correction. We're for the dual executive of the president, which is everything except for the Fed, which is the other thing.
Yeah. And I think that reflects the way that, like, it turns out, like, foreign aid was enormously important to millions of people around the world, and Elon Musk's actions are probably in the process of killing tens or hundreds of thousands of people.
No, probably millions.
But there wasn't that institutional support for them the way there has been institutional support for the courts, honestly, and for the Federal Reserve.
The court system is an interesting one to me. I spent a lot of time thinking about the courts over the last few years, and I sort of on paper always thought that the Supreme Court only hears a very small number of cases per year, really, really small, whereas the federal court system overall hears a huge amount. So de facto, the courts overall have more power than the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is the most powerful court by far. If it focuses on something, it can usually overwhelm any instinct or political leaning of the lower courts. And also the lower courts are very lawful to the extent, to such an extent that if they believe that the Supreme Court is very clear on something, they will follow it. I mean, they're very good implementers by and large, the district courts especially. With some exceptions. But this year we've really seen that they matter a lot. And even when the Supreme Court is outright hostile to them, which is pretty much, I mean, Kavanaugh and Alito are saying things about the district courts that are just insane and unhinged. They're essentially saying that they have claimed that the district courts are bucking the Supreme Court, which is just not true. What's happened is the Supreme Court has issued a bunch of these shadow docket, rulings, or not even rulings. I'm not sure the specific term, that interfere in ongoing cases, mostly to stop freezing actions by the Trump administration. But they don't explain that. Sometimes they don't explain why at all. Sometimes they explain very unclearly, and sometimes they're not even really clear on what it is they're ordering the district courts to do. So the district courts are muddling along as best as they can with both their understanding of the real law on the one hand, and these incredibly conflicted and mixed messages sent from the Supreme Court, and it's just an impossible task. So, basically Kavanaugh or Alito's statements usually amounts to, you can tell what we really want, which is just to stop messing with the president, right? But they won't outright say that. They still try to couch it in legalese. So the district court response is along the lines of, well, no, we can't tell what you want because you didn't say it. You have to actually say it. Like, that's not how this works. We're not in the game of trying to guess your wishes and desires. Like, we're in the business of implementing the law. And it's very interesting. I mean, this may be what really saves us more than anything, to be frank, is the great vice and the great virtue of the American system is if the courts are unsure about things, they can bring things to a grinding halt.
I mean, so I think it's really interesting here that you talked about, like, even the Supreme Court, which seems mostly on board with Trumpism, or on board enough, right, is trying to articulate that in a way that's like constrained by like the forms and orders of law, where they have not yet just said to the lower courts, like, come on, just get on board with MAGA, right? They want to articulate a legal doctrine, but they can't articulate a legal doctrine. They're all hung up on this. But I think that, like, when I'm talking about the strength of the courts, I also mean, to bring it back to the Abrego Garcia point, is Abrego Garcia was in like a Nicaraguan,
El Salvador.
Oh, excuse me. I said it and I knew I was wrong as I was saying it. An El Salvadorian prison that, like, famously no one ever gets out of.
Yeah.
Right, and it appears to just be like a torture prison.
Yeah, and the Trump administration was saying, "Well, it's not our prison, and we can't now."
Right, we deported him. He's outside of the reach of American law. So sorry, too bad. And the court said, "No, you have to bring him back," and they did. They brought him back.
They brought him back. They took their time, and they, it looked for a long time like they just weren't going to, but then they did. They did do it. And what's more, they then tried to turn around and punish him for the embarrassment, and that has not stuck. He's walking free today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm really struck by. So I'm reading Stephen Kotkin's biographies of Stalin, and Kotkin talks about how the Communist Party, like, notionally had like rules about how different people were elected to different boards and different committees, and like how different decisions were actually supposed to be made by like the Politburo, the Orgbureau, or the Communist International, which is like notionally like one of the highest bodies, but in practice, all the decisions are just getting made on Stalin's desk, right? And so you have like this superficial, like, formal structure, but in reality, it's a personal structure, right? In reality, it all just converges on Stalin. But he's able to do this through, again, according to Kotkin anyways, an enormous attention to detail and an enormous amount of energy to just build a machine and keep the machine running himself. Whereas what we see is that Trump has really struggled to do that, right? He has struggled to break out of the formal modes of law in the United States. I mean, we see this even in Venezuela, right? Where it's like right now, he isn't saying we did it because I wanted to. They're claiming to have executed a warrant, and they actually brought FBI agents along with them to Venezuela in order to like execute a warrant to capture or to arrest Maduro, right? Which is just a sign that he has not been able to just say, I get to do whatever I want, even though like he's pushing towards that. Yeah. That's what he wants, quite obviously.
Yeah.
But in some level, they're still constrained by institutions. And it's fascinating to me which institutions have held and which have capitulated, right? Have actively capitulated to Trump.
No, this is actually a very good point too, in the Stalin example of building the machine. So what have they done different with ICE? What probably the lowest point of the year for me, in terms of my pessimism, was well after Will's tweet about saying that the revolution was over. And that was when the big bill was passed, because it was so unpopular. And they only did it because Trump told them to. And it was just such a sign that he had so much power over the congressional Republicans. But more than that, too, was how much money they poured into immigration enforcement from that bill. And it made me feel like, well, okay, like there's only so much they can do with ICE right now and CBP, but they're pouring a lot more in now. That'll take time to scale up. But they've pretty much shown that until they lose Congress, or at least one chamber of it, um, they could keep pouring in more money, however often they want to. Now I kind of doubt that the congressional Republicans have fallen apart to a greater degree. Marjorie Taylor Greene is leaving. Their majority gets slimmer by the day, and it was already very tenuous. So I'm less worried about that. But now what you were saying about building the machine, the thing that they have done is not actually build a machine. What Miller did is he went to ICE and he said, stop doing investigative work, stop figuring out who you're arresting in advance and doing the bare minimum professional job that you have to do for law enforcement, which ICE is already not a very professional organization, but throw that all out the window and just go to Home Depots and grab anyone there that's there for day labor. Just go places and grab people who look Hispanic and we'll figure it out from there. And okay, that's one way to create fear. And I think there's been a lot of self-deportations this year. And that's one of their goals, unfortunately, that perhaps they achieve. But one thing that will not do is actually build a machine of terror, right? That is a very haphazard, and again, it draws, as we've seen, it draws an intense backlash from the population. The most normie, unpolitical people you can imagine just see that and get absolutely outraged, at seeing it in their lives. Because the way that regimes like this work, the way that they succeed is by not exposing the normal suburban, white people who are independents or whatever to the ugliest side of the regime in their personal lives. It all happens away from them. A lot of people still end up getting hurt or killed, but it's not right there in your intimate setting. And so people just sort of tune it out as, well, that's just how the world is. As much as they've tuned out mass incarceration or foreign wars or anything like that, right? But if they're shopping at Target and a bunch of masked thugs come in and grab some old lady or tear a mother away from her young kid and leave the kid there by themselves, even a cold-hearted, fairly anti-immigration person is often going to react to that viscerally, right?
No, so I think this is really interesting, right? When I talk about a machine, right, I don't there are actually kind of well-known and well-studied ways about how do you build a machine of terror, right? How do you build an authoritarian machine, right? And there are certain things you need to be able to do, right? You need to be able to target the population on a granular level, target your critics on a granular level. You need to be able to ruin people or advance people, right? Not even the top 0.1%, but the top 10%, the top 50% of people to control their ability to advance in life. And that just needs a lot of bureaucracy behind it. It turns out it needs a lot of bureaucracy, needs a lot of money to make that machine go around. And they're not doing that. What they're doing is spectacle, right? Meme politics, as we've talked about before, right? I think, with this Venezuela operation, they've been obsessed with the imagery of it, right? Yeah. They like the imagery of books cooking off, whatever the Russian military system cooking off, and Chinooks flying over Caracas and perp walking Maduro, right? They like the warfare imagery of it. And just as, with the deportations, they wanted the imagery, right? If you look at the official ICE account, it's all about imagery, right? It's all about you're defending the homeland and you're grabbing bad guys, and they rappelled off a Black Hawk into a suburban Chicago apartment building, because they wanted that imagery. But what I think has happened here is that they have completely cooked their own brains on their own esoteric social media, and so they've pursued a politics of spectacle, but they have lost track of what spectacles Americans actually
Yeah,
like.
that's true.
Right, and like you're talking about all these imagery of like masked thugs grabbing people off the street, like they deliberately created those
Yeah, because
images
I think it's cool.
because they think it's cool, because they think it's based and trad, and they think like all Americans are secretly waiting, right, to actually get mass deportation going. And then, of course, it's really had the opposite effect,
Right,
right?
right. What
People,
Americans, because Americans aren't by and large like, yay, let's have tons of immigration. What Americans want is for criminals to be deported, and they don't care what happens to them or how badly they're treated. And to them, criminals are like rapists and killers and violent thugs, right? That's what they think of in their heads. So they don't care how badly we treat rapists and killers and violent thugs, basically. Um, and for the people who are here just illegally and they haven't done any crimes otherwise, they just want them to be politely escorted off, to the other side of the border. That's like in their mind. Like they don't want, and they're not even, they probably don't even have a particular image in their head of what that looks like or who those people are. But they just in principle are like, hey, coming here without, not legally is against the law. You shouldn't break the law. You should have to leave. Like that's how it is, right? They don't want like jackbooted thugs coming into their own intimate lives in order to nab the guy across the counter that they've been buying from for years that they know is a perfectly safe dude. They may not love that dude particularly, but like it's shocking to see that in your own life. And they don't think it's based and awesome. They think it's horrifying. So yeah, no, I think I agree. They cook their own brains in some ways. Someone was saying, I forget who, but someone was saying, in fact, Elon Musk buying Twitter may not have turned out to be to their benefit. First of all, it's not actually that great of a media platform in terms of amplifying their message. But second of all, they seem to, like, since it's become theirs, they've allowed it to cook their brains. Like they've optimized the way they think to the way Twitter thinks, which is completely deranged and not at all attached to the real world.
no, I mean, Catherine Cross has written several essays for us about this,
Yeah.
right? Based on her book, Log Off. What was like one of them was like Meta Mirror World. There's another one
Yes.
she wrote for us, right? Just about how social media matters. In part, it's like you say, Twitter isn't very big, but the people who are there can be quite big,
Important.
right?
Yeah.
A lot of elites are there. And Elon Musk's tenure, yeah, he's really boosted certain ideologies and certain ideas that he wants to see out there. And it has just made them kind of crazy in ways that I think are like dangerous and destructive, as you noted right at the outset, but I think also kind of dysfunctional, right?
Yeah.
It made it harder for them to understand the world around them.
Sure.
And that kind of brings me to another question I want to talk about, something we've been touching on here and there, which is elites, right? What's your read on like the elite reaction to Trump over the last year and a half?
Yeah, I think it's domain dependent. So I think that journalists per se, like the journalists themselves, have mostly reacted well. They've continued to actually get, the Trump administration leaks a lot because that's another thing they're not competent about. Then again, it's sort of hard to stop leaks these days. But if it's hard for most administrations, it's harder for them. It's even harder when they piss off their own bureaucracy, right? So they leak a lot, and reporters report on it, regardless of how unfavorable it is to the president. And so I think journalists per se, the individuals, the professionals, have been pretty good. The reporters have been pretty good. Media institutions have not been good, and that is because Trump has successfully intimidated them through lawsuits, through his control of mergers and acquisitions, through the FTC. Yeah. So, but the interesting thing is, I know you asked me about elites, but what's been interesting is where elites have done the best is where they've been forced to face a larger public. So, they tried to cancel Jimmy Kimmel, but then there was a very effective boycott of Disney Plus where they lost lots of money. And so consumers won, essentially, and they brought him back on. Similarly, again, I wouldn't call this a mass public, but early in the year when companies were dismantling their DEI programs in advance, Apple tried to do the same through a shareholder vote, and the shareholder said, "Hell no, we're not. You are not going to do that." And obviously, like, no one would call shareholders, the masses. But I mean, still, like, that's interesting when you get into a group that's a little bit larger than just the top decision makers. It's been pretty good, I think. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is interesting, right? That Trump, like, again, kind of came into this office with this idea that he was going to wage an all fronts war on civil society, right? That they really, like, there's this famous line from Breitbart that, politics is downstream of culture, right? And this is kind of, we've talked about this before on this channel, right? This is like the cathedral theory that is famous from Curtis Yarvin, but this idea that, like, elite institutions at the very top level that are, like, outside of government, but, like, the ideas that they put out there are totally shaping society, right? So Trump comes and says, okay, we're going to go to war with universities. We're going to go to war with the press. We're going to go to war with law firms, right? All these, like, we're going to go to war with the corporate world over, like, woke and DEI, and, like, their complaints about DEI made it into the national security strategy.
Yes.
Right. They're really mad about this stuff.
Yes.
But they got a couple of law firms to sign a couple of things. That kind of sucks. Right. But like we've talked about, people are still getting representation. Right. Again, they, got some universities to sign some things. We're seeing, especially in red states, right, red states, public universities that are, like, kind of under the thumb of the governor, like, those are under much more severe attack. But the Ivies seem to have mostly not gone along with, like, we're not going to, like, fire the history department or whatever, right, and replace them with the MAGA department.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think you're right that there has been this level of vacillation, that there are clearly elites who, I mean, obviously they're just people who are MAGA, but there was this sense, I think, among liberal elites that, well, shit, Trump won. I guess he's in charge now. I guess he's the wave of the future.
Right.
They just seem to, like, lack conviction.
Yeah.
But what I think we're seeing right now, like you say, is, business elites realizing, oh shit, we have to make some money.
Yeah.
Right.
Target was another one, right? Target.
Yeah, no, Target has had ongoing problems, right? I think the Target boycott has, like, hurt them pretty badly. And I think other companies have noticed, right? So we had this divergence where, okay, the elites, like, want to give up on woke or whatever, but like, the American people aren't really there. Right. Yeah. Like you say, Trump actually won a very narrow election. It was not a crushing election. It was not a mandate. It was not a landslide.
Yeah.
Right. The massive, like, it was never the case that, this was not 1980 when the entire map turned red.
Right.
Right. This was right. And I think elites kind of acted like it was. But I think we're seeing some retreat from that, even as, like, the circle is, very far from over. Okay. We've got to talk about Venezuela.
We do have to talk about Venezuela.
Yeah, it wasn't really my plan coming into this, but then I woke up this morning and it turns out we're technically totally not at war with Venezuela. We just invaded them and stole their president, which is apparently a thing you can do now without going to war with people, because we live in a postmodern world, I guess. So, yeah, Adam, what's your read on Venezuela?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways it's not complicated, right? I mean, Trump, any president, it's sort of a stereotype of a president who's mired in scandal turning to some kind of foreign adventure for a quick win, and the rally around the flag effect. And in this case, I think you put it, elsewhere, that he's sort of got a nose in international places where the weakness is,
I mean, not just international affairs. I think that's
yeah,
like, to
no,
be honest to the
fair,
man,
yeah.
I believe in learning from our enemies, and I think Trump has a nose for weakness. But sorry, go on. Like, that's one of his real strengths, right? Is just identifying weak points.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, but
Uh,
similar, like when he bombed Iran, when he killed their general in his first term, um, everyone was rightfully outraged, but essentially nothing happened. There was no retaliation, and he pandered to his base, and that general was a very bad guy. Like, so for the most part, everyone was. He probably got the perception was more positive than negative, I would say, as a result of that. Similarly, Maduro, terrible dictator in a terrible system. Nobody's going to say, "Oh no, you've attacked a heroic figure that we love." No one that matters anyway. Uh, so he targets one bad guy. Now, of course, complicating this is the fact that he's been murdering civilians on the open seas for months now. I mean, how long has it been going on? Months. And for no reason at all, barely a pretext, and no evidence provided for the bare pretext that they've given for it. And then he goes in again, like you said, kidnaps their president in the dark of night, killing who knows how many civilians when they did so.
This is another interesting example where you can kind of see him working within existing institutional structures, right? Like,
Yeah,
this is the war on terror, right? We had 20 years to build up a kind of a military structure that just likes doing this shit, and a legal structure that is like, oh, the president can totally just kill people in foreign
yeah,
countries, right?
yeah,
Presidents have been killing random people in foreign countries for 20 years, right?
yeah.
Without really
Honestly,
any congressional oversight. We didn't do it to a president before, right? That's the
yeah.
big difference here.
Honestly, longer. There's I'll have to look it up. There's a book on war powers that I read in the first Trump term. I'd have to go find again, but it essentially makes the point that with the Cold War, we built up this huge military structure. It's very presidential driven in terms of how it moves. We're much less likely to make Congress actually declare a war. And something that they do increasingly after the Cold War, like Bush 1 did this kind of move, is presidents would move troops into a situation and then make Congress support them after the fact. This kind of like this game of chicken that they would play with Congress, that they would always win because Congress doesn't want to leave American troops stranded and undefended. So presidential unilateralism with the military goes back a very long ways at this point. And yeah, with the war on terror, it reached new heights, and it just continued to expand from there. We never unrang that bell. So yeah, no, like with immigration, again, immigration always, there was a lot of discretion after 9/11, and after the creation of DHS, it gets turbocharged because it gets lumped into this fighting terrorism category as well for a while. Both of these structures are sort of joined at the hip of, we've given the executive branch a huge amount of discretion that it doesn't have in a lot of other areas. And Trump knows this. And yeah, like you said, makes use of it.
I mean, I think the history of the drone strikes, the drone killings that we've been doing again for like the last 20 years is interesting, where Biden didn't get a lot of credit for this, but he basically ended the drone war, right? He
Yeah.
basically stopped killing people overseas with drones, but he didn't actually undo any of the physical or legal or institutional infrastructure to support that, right? The
Yeah.
machine was still there, and Trump walks in and basically just turns it back
on. Yeah.
right? And so, yeah, I mean, I think this is obviously, in one way, this is an enormous escalation from like what people expected these war powers to be used for, right? Kidnapping the head of a sovereign country is unbelievably far out of line. On the other hand, it's like a place where over a span of decades, we've kind of opened up this arena, this room for maneuver for the president. Unfortunately, I think, because I think presidents have mostly used it for completely stupid things.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I agree.
We didn't actually get any strategic advantage out of this. It's just a place for presidents to make bad decisions.
Yeah.
And I also think this is a great example of the politics of spectacle over substance. right? Even kidnapping a president somehow seems like they don't even have the thought about what's going to happen the day after,
No,
right? Trump was out
clearly.
there earlier today talking about how they'd cooperated with the Venezuelan vice president and she was just going to do whatever we wanted now and she
Right.
was going to hand over their oil and do this and do that. And she has immediately gotten out on social media and said, none of that is true. I'm running the country now. Maduro's our president. We want him back. Right. So like it's unclear whether kidnapping Maduro has even achieved regime change.
Yeah,
Right. It
right.
hasn't even done anything on a strategic level, even though it's generated like a lot of material for posting and,
Right.
again, killed quite a few people. I believe the count is around 40 at this point,
Yeah.
in Venezuela. And I don't know, it just feels like another case where there are these existing institutional weaknesses and like part of our task has got to be to rebuild a better future rather than to just turn the machine off again and wait around for
Yeah.
someone else to turn it back on.
No, it was a real failure of the Biden trifecta that they didn't revoke a bunch of emergency powers and authorization of the use of military force. They didn't really seriously look at any of that stuff.
No, and I mean they've not yet anyway cited the authorization for use of military force. They're just saying that this is like they're pushing on the unitary executive theory in a way. They're
Right.
saying, well,
It's
this is
true.
the inherent power of the executive to execute arrest warrants, including if that means going to war with another country.
Yeah.
Right. And like if this were true, it would just, make the whole constitution kind of meaningless. Right. If the president can
why,
just say, well,
why even have a section saying that Congress has to declare wars at all at that
yeah,
point?
that's right. Why even have a section that says Congress has to declare wars? Um, again, a power that Congress has basically abdicated.
I know.
Um,
I know. And they still
yeah.
won't
So
even like consult them.
okay, so this is. I mean, I don't really want to issue a lot of predictions about Venezuela. The situation is obviously
No. Yeah. Who
still
knows?
unfolding. It is a pretty grotesque violation of international norms. It definitely feels like a violation of, the congressional power to declare
Yeah.
war. What the hell are we going to do about it? Right? Like, this is something you mentioned at the outset. Okay, probably Trump is on track to be very unpopular.
Yeah.
Probably he's not going to be able to stop elections. He's not going to be able to run for a third term. We're going to retake power. But that's not enough,
Yeah.
right? Why not?
Yeah. I mean, like you said, all these structures existed for him to use. He's broken a lot of things, but he's also made use of a lot of things, and that's not good enough. One thing about what we can do that I have written about is impeachment. Right? If we actually took both houses of Congress this year, we could impeach a lot of people. Frankly, Hegseth is probably the easiest one because nobody likes him. He barely got confirmed. But there's others, and Trump himself, again, could go for a third one. And what other countries do in presidential systems that haven't gotten their druthers to just get rid of their presidential system and do parliamentary systems is they adopt a secret ballot for the impeachment trial, which is something that the Senate could do. There's like some language in the Constitution about how if a small minority of the Senate says that they want a record of votes kept, they have to do it. But it's also up to the majority whether or not to publish that. So they could absolutely set a set of rules that says everyone's ballot is secret. We're not going to, even if we record your vote, we're not going to publish it, and increase the chances of some Republicans defecting. And even if they think that a future Republican majority Senate could publicize those votes later, the coordination problem is really getting people to line up to do the thing now. And maybe they wouldn't line up to get rid of Trump. Maybe getting rid of a Republican president is too much, but they might get rid of Hegseth, or they might get rid of Bondi. They might get rid of people or Cash. Like they might get rid of people they think are just embarrassments to them, or brazenly terrible in some way. And once you actually remove anyone, then all of a sudden impeachment has teeth, and Congress is more threatening than it was, right? Like just the appearance of strength is strength in the institutions game. So that is something that a Democratic Congress could do next year. But I think what your question was really getting at is the longer question of how did we get here? How do we get to a system where Donald Trump could do what he's doing? And there's no such thing as a system that can mitigate against every bad actor that might take it at some point, or frankly against an electorate that's willing to support them. There's really only so much you can design against that, but there is a lot we can do. And for example, if we had simply not had an electoral college in 2016, or if we had not had direct primary system for we let parties pick their own candidates, we would not have had Donald Trump in 2016, just as a simple example. And if we had not had him in 2016, we would not have had the lion's share of what came next, right? Like there's so many things that are just tied to him and what he turned the Republican Party into, and the Republican voter base into, that without him, we avoid at least a short-term catastrophe that we've had. That doesn't necessarily mean that everything is smooth sailing. So there are things we can do, and we should seriously be talking about what those things are.
Yeah, so I really like your point about impeachment, right? That this is something that we don't need to wait for the next presidential election to do. It's not going to happen with a Republican Congress, but if we do well in the midterms, and we're very much on track to, then that's something that we can do with the Democratic Congress, and we can introduce the secret ballot again, not with laws or constitutional amendments, but just by changing Senate rules, right? We can do things to empower Congress in the face of an executive. And so I think those are good things to be building towards today. But again, that just brings us back to the question of, well, are we just going to remove Trump and turn the machine off and leave it there?
Right.
And I hope not. Right. And one thing I've talked about on this podcast before that I really kind of believe in is what I'm going to call the bookshelf theory of policy, where when politicians get into power, they don't formulate all of their ideas out of the ether. What they do is they look at the bookshelf, right? And the bookshelf is full of ideas that someone else has come up with ahead of time, right? And the more well fleshed out your idea is, the better a playbook you have for implementing that idea, the easier it is to go to a politician and say, you want to do something? Here's something, right? I've got a whole book on it. Right. I think this has been in many ways very effective for the YIMBY movement, right? Where these days when a politician wants to do something about the housing crisis, YIMBYs are there with a whole book about things you can do about the housing crisis.
Yeah.
And I think we see this happening right now. I don't think it's really broken out into mass attention just yet. But if you move around in elite liberal circles, the groups, you can see that people are starting to try and have their fights about what happened and what are we going to do about it, right? Every major faction within the party wants to have their platform, right? You have people who want to say, well, it really was all just about affordability, and we should forget about the culture war, and we should talk about affordability. And did I mention affordability? Right? And we're just going to only talk about affordability, and we're going to have X, Y, and Z proposal about affordability.
Yeah.
Where you have various kinds of like third way-ish groups that are like, we should capitulate on the culture war. We should say they were right the whole time about trans people, right? Like Matt Iglesias, of all people, right? He had like his 7-point common sense program for America, and like 5 of them were meaningless and 2 of them were anti-trans. I don't know. Right. And so what I want to ask you about is what we are trying to do here at Liberal Currents. I want to ask you about the Reconstruction Papers.
Yeah. It's funny. I think Reconstruction is on a lot of people's minds. I've seen the term ever since we've been talking about this most of 2025, but I've been seeing it more towards the end of the year. More and more people using the same word to for similar reasons, thinking about the long term. For us, we're organizing this collection of essays. We'll go to people who are experts in higher education, war powers, immigration policy, but in immigration institutions, all of it, but also civil society things, media system things, the culture side as well. And just say, give us your most ambitious vision for rebuilding. If not from scratch, then as close to going back to the drawing board as you feel reasonably you can do, because that's what we need. And that's what America does. That's what we've done cyclically from the beginning. Even the Constitution that we revere so much was calling it a second draft is probably even underselling it, frankly. The first draft was the Articles of Confederation, but really the first drafts were the constitutions that the states wrote for themselves after the Declaration of Independence. Poor John Adams, he sort of wrote this resolution that they were all going to go and do this and write their own constitutions. And in his mind, that was just as momentous as the Declaration of Independence itself, but it's been lost to history because subsequent events with the actual Constitution we ended up with made those things irrelevant. But we have a long history of just going back to the drawing board, writing constitutions. If not writing constitutions, then rebuilding our institutions. We do this a lot. We did this. We did this in the Revolution. We did this at the Constitutional Congress. We did this with Reconstruction. We did this with the Progressives. We did this with the New Deal, and we did this with the Great Society. There's been a lot of it. Arguably in a negative way, you could say we did this with Reagan as well to some extent. Certainly, we did this in the War on Terror, also in a negative way. But I think I would more say that what's happened in the 90s to now, especially, or even the 80s to now, has been a moment of stagnation and division. So before the big progressive victory, before the New Deal, there was a similar moment of polarization where Congress and the presidency was changing party hands very rapidly, very narrowly, and it seemed like they couldn't get their act together to get a modern administrative state the way that European states had already built decades ago at that point. But then the New Deal happened. They did it. It was frankly a mess at first, but they built it first and then they made it better over time. And that's sort of the American way is just get it done. But I think we're at a moment now where we need to go back to the drawing board. There are so many things that had become dysfunctional before Trump. It's not just the presidency. It's not just the executive branch. It's not even just the political institutions themselves. It's so many other facets. And so we do need to go back to the drawing board again. And the Reconstruction Papers is just one first stab at offering that blueprint.
No, I think you're absolutely right to emphasize that for a long time it feels like nothing ever changes in American politics and nothing can ever change, and we're just locked into the final form of whatever. And I don't think that's true. Right? As you know, there's a long history of us rebuilding our institutions to cope with a changing world, to overcome the failures of past institutions. And that's kind of what I think is so important about the Reconstruction Papers, right? I feel like other people who are throwing their hats in the ring here, they think the way to answer our problems is to do issue polling on the top 20 issues and just ask the most banal questions, and to lack imagination and to lack boldness, to lack a vision about what to do. And I think what we're trying to do here is to have that programmatic vision and to have it be a genuinely liberal one that is committed to liberal principles and that can show how liberal principles can answer some of these questions, can fix the institutional rot that we've been talking about for this whole episode.
And that's our sales pitch, basically. We're going to do that. We're going to do that. We're going to do it in the first half of the year, ideally, hopefully, put on plan, and we're going to publish it. We're going to print it, and that the hope is that it gets circulated into the hands of people that matter, that can influence these future decisions.
Yeah. So if you're listening, that is a project that is in process right now. We have people who are working on foreign policy, who are working on the constitutional issues, who are working on um, sex and gender and trans issues. We want this to be something that's comprehensive, right? That can show, in a programmatic way, that the liberal project has answers for the most pressing questions ahead of us. So yeah, Adam, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, for talking about the state of play with Trump and why we are going to win.